Hey everyone, welcome back to Research Methods. We are officially in week 3 and we're looking at chapter 5 of our text. And this chapter is about writing a research proposal. So whether you're planning a project for class, a thesis down the road, or dissertation, or a real world study, this chapter is a foundation because this is kind of what gets you to the approval phase of moving forward with, collecting data and analyzing and interpreting it. So we're going to explore how to really build a clear, convincing, and well-structured proposal. So a research proposal. It's definitely more than just a formality. It is the blueprint for your entire study. Should clearly explain your problem, subproblems, the hypotheses, or the questions that you're asking, the definitions, the methodology. It shows not only what you're going to study, but more importantly, how you're going to execute that plan and then why it matters. That's important as well. So I would suggest characteristics of a research proposal. You want to keep it simple, precise, professional. Use clear language, avoid unnecessary details, follow the expected structure and formatting. That's important depending on if it's, whatever the institution is that you're trying to submit the proposal to, or a funding agency or an organization. You want to make sure that you're following the expected structure and formatting of their proposal process or whatever that looks like. Your goal in the proposal phase is to just communicate and not impress with complexity. So depending on whether you are trying to propose a quantitative study or a qualitative study, they both follow a structure, a typical structure. So we'll go through the quantitative proposal too and how that's organized. It's organized by the problem and its setting. So look at the problem, give the background of the problem. You'll have a problem space and a problem statement. You'll then have a literature review. So how has this topic evolved over time? Your data plan. And when I say that, I mean data and its treatment of data. So not only how are we going to collect the data, but how are we going to store the data? How are we going to analyze the data? That's critical in a research proposal. And then appendices and references, of course. So it's methodical, it's linear, just like most quantitative research. When it comes to qualitative research, those proposals, they may feel a little bit more flexible, but they do still need structure. So typically we start with an introduction and then we lay out the methodology, we lay out the management plan, again, the how, the timeline, the feasibility, and again, clarity, logic, totally key here. Now, whether you're doing quantitative or qualitative research, your proposal should really guide readers clearly, and not only clearly, but logically from one section to the next section. So you want to think of it as telling the story of your future research. Now, in social sciences, we use APA 7th edition or 7th style, and this is what you want to adhere to. And this is how you're going to see other social science research utilizing APA 7th. You can purchase this book or this manual on Amazon from their website. There's even a concise student version that's really helpful as well. But if you're using APA style, you want to follow the formatting exact. So even font type, even font size. Most importantly, the heading levels. Heading levels are very important because each level actually signals hierarchy. And if you're missing them, it can actually confuse your readers. So again, it is best to get familiar with APA 7th edition and really start to get comfortable with that. So writing your proposal, you want to start with your ideas. Don't worry immediately about like perfect grammar in the first draft, but just be detailed in your methods, explain your assumptions. Don't assume the reader knows about your topic. That's critical. You also want to be honest and show that you're approaching the research with a very open mind, with curiosity and openness. And, remember, plagiarism, even accidental, must be avoided. But you want to use, obviously, a great word processing software. I use Word, Microsoft Word, and then I also have a plugin for Grammarly installed that's been very helpful for me as I'm writing, kind of set an academic tone. That's very helpful. You want to present the research problem at the beginning. So I mentioned this when I was talking about writing a quantitative, you know, proposal, but you want to set that problem space and get the reader set up for why, right? Why is this the sweet spot and how is it going to add to the existing knowledge on that topic or in this field? You want to also revise your proposal. So after you've written it, I would say the best guidance I've been given on any paper that I've written or my dissertation, or I mean, truly anything, the best guidance I've been given is just put your draft down, put it down for a few days, let your draft sit out, print it out, read it critically after a day or two. Is everything logical? Is it easy to follow? Are my citations complete? Ask someone that you trust to review it and give feedback. And you can do that in a few ways. You can find somebody that's a colleague that also is maybe a novice researcher. You can even reach out to more experienced researchers and ask for their critical eye and feedback. But you can also give it to somebody that you trust that knows truly nothing about research. So when I have written papers in the past, I've given them to not only a peer or a colleague in my class, because that person's known kind of what we've been going through and can look at things kind of very similarly to me, but also is quick to point out the little things that I might have missed or overlooked. But I would also have my husband read it. And so I would find that if I had my husband read it, he would ask me questions. And if there were questions that were left, that meant that he didn't really understand or follow. So that was my signal to go back into that section and maybe organize my thoughts a little bit better. Now, you want to look for text that might be clearer. You want to keep your sentences very simple and straightforward. You want to carefully scrutinize all of that. And then at that point, after you've let it sit out for a couple of days, check carefully for those errors in grammars and punctuation and spelling, all of that. I will also say you want to make sure that there's one-to-one correspondence. And when I say one-to-one correspondence, I'm talking specifically about the in-text citations versus the reference list entry items. So if you ever use an in-text citation, every in-text citation must have a reference list entry in the references at the back. So if you have it in the body of the paper, you have to have it listed as a reference list item. And as you're going through and editing, the best guidance I can give you on any paper is sometimes we'll put an in-text citation, we'll put a reference list item in the back, and then we might end up removing that citation. We might say, hey, I don't want to cite this at all. I'm not going to use it. It's not relevant. Make sure that wherever you're adding or removing in the other place, and do it at the same time so that you don't forget, because that's important too. Those are little things that can kind of derail and delay some of the proposal from being approved. Now, when you're revising it, you also want to look for and correct any of the weaknesses. And when I say weaknesses, this is an opportunity for you to be honest with yourself here and know that weaknesses don't mean failure. It just means refinement, and that's okay. So there are a few types of weaknesses that are tied to certain areas. So there could be weaknesses that are related to the research problem itself. It could be that the research has an unclear purpose. It could be that the problem itself is unimportant. Maybe we didn't define our hypotheses very well. The problem might be too complex. So when I say that, we have a tendency as humans to overcomplicate things or get stuck in analysis paralysis, and we are making a mountain out of a molehill. And so sometimes you just have to simplify it a little bit. Another, maybe weakness that's related to the research problem could be that the problem just has limited relevance to the field. And that's important, right? We want to make sure that we're looking at all of that. There are also weaknesses related to the research design and methodology. So it's possible that the description of the design and the method is too vague or it's unfocused. It could be that the data is inappropriate for the research problem and how we might collect it, how we might analyze it. It could be that the procedures that we take in that for the research problem isn't correct. It could also be that maybe we didn't consider the right statistical analysis, because we do need to talk about that in the proposal. So how do we plan to analyze the data once we collect it? What software are we going to use? What type of test are we going to run? Those are all critical. Now I want to go back and touch on one of the things, and I mentioned first, I think when it came to the research design and methodology weaknesses, is the description of the design as method or is method is vague or it's unfocused. And I say that because everything in the research proposal, everything we write in general, there needs to be alignment. So, for example, if I am saying that I'm going to do a qualitative research study, qualitative meaning I'm going to talk to people, I'm going to understand, they're going to describe, maybe describe something or share their lived experience with me, whatever that looks like. I'm not going to have a research question that's going to say, if and to what extent does a relationship exist between mindfulness and well being? That's a quantitative study. So the alignment has to be there. So if we have a qualitative methodology and the existing gap in literature is that, hey, we need to focus on these topics, but future recommendations include conducting a qualitative study with the same population or conducting a qualitative study with, this different population. So if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that the research question and the hypotheses align with that and how we analyze the data aligns with that. So be very careful and really think critically in those areas. Now, there are also weaknesses that are related to the investigator. And when I say investigator, I mean researcher, you, the research team. It could be that maybe there's insufficient training, there's a lack of experience. It could be that you're unfamiliar with the literature that's relevant for the proposed topic. So in my last video, I mentioned the role that the literature review plays, and it's very, very important because this is the opportunity for you to not only get familiar with it, but understand the evolution of this topic over time. Understand, maybe what conceptual models or theoretical foundations that research is built on and based on and grounded in. So become very familiar with the literature that's related to your proposed topic. And then finally, I think another weakness related to the researcher is just that the researcher might just have insufficient time to devote to the project. And that happens too. There's also weaknesses related to resources. So when I say that, I mentioned, I think at the beginning, institutional settings, right? So maybe a university, there is organization. So it could be a company, a workplace, nonprofit, whatever that looks like. And there could be a funding agency. You could work with one, you could work with all. It really just depends. But I will say that some of the weaknesses could be that maybe the institutional setting is unfavorable for the proposed research. So, for example, I know a lot of universities have some rules about students conducting research, and particularly with vulnerable populations. So, for example, prisoners, pregnant women, elderly, maybe even children. In some institutional settings, they may say, we don't conduct studies here at this institution on this population at all. But for those that do, plan for more time for approval because it does have to go through the institutional review board. There are additional safeguards that need to take place. So if you can think through all of this at the front end and be very diligent in how you're writing the proposal, it will hopefully not derail, right? And add a lot of time to that. Now, I will say that there are some other detractions from proposal effectiveness. And so things you want to look for and correct: a vague statement of the problem, an incomplete described methodology. It could be maybe the way you phrase the proposal isn't useful for evaluating it. You want to also look out for and correct maybe failure to include cited sources, right? That could detract from getting your proposal approved. Could be that the sources are incompletely or incorrectly cited. That will do that too. If the problem doesn't address the research area that's outlined by the funding agency or the institution or the organization, chances are you're gonna have to come back and you're gonna have to redo some stuff. And every institution, every organization, even journals, right? They all have a very specific format that needs to be followed. So it's in your best interest to know what that is up front and make sure you're following that structured guideline or checklist. And Finally, I would say a clear and explicit statement is lacking. That could be, something that you need to look at and make sure that you're, again, being very clear about upfront. So, writing a research proposal, it takes focus and it takes discipline, of course, but that is your chance to really clarify your vision and build a roadmap for a future research study. So you want to think of it as the bridge between your idea and your actual research. This is the scaffolding that we're building right now for you, and I hope that this was helpful. Thank you so much.